Hello, welcome to this episode, Embracing Differences with me, Nipin Anand. And I'm joined with Billy Martin. So, Billy, maybe we start off with a light introduction about yourself and then we will slip into the discussion.
All right, sure. I've done a lot of things, Nipin. I grew up in the electric utility industry. I've done a lot of the jobs there, including 20 years as a lineman. But simultaneously, I became a paramedic. So while I was a paramedic and a lineman, I flew on a helicopter as a flight paramedic. And in the meantime, I also got a diploma in mountain medicine, which basically means I learning medicine in austere environments. So I've been to Everest Base Camp, climbed Kilimanjaro. Just past February, I was at Mount Kenya in Africa for the third time. And then when I retired, I went to nursing school and flew for another 6 years as a nurse, registered nurse paramedic. And interestingly enough, in that short time, I also ran a pacemaker clinic, was a cardiology nurse per diem, home infusion nurse, and an orthopedic nurse. So somehow I've done all of these different things, but in all of them, especially in medicine and in our industry, you run across these incidents or near misses or accidents, if you want to call them, that are just, it's awful to see the tail end of them, the result of what happens. Not only there's a ripple effect to what happens to the family and to the children and all these family members after somebody gets hurt. And I can't help but see that every incident has a whole list of things that occur in front of it that are totally visible, but invisible at the time. And that's kind of what that's where I am, and that's what brought me here to talk to you.
And I think that's a really interesting paradox or a dialectic to explore, that things are both visible and invisible at the same time. So, Billy, maybe talk a little bit more about this. Let's see where this goes.
So, this idea that so right now we seem to be obsessed with stopping things from ever happening again, Nippon. You know, I mean, the 9/11 in the USA, when that happened, the Twin Towers came down. That was an awful thing. And what we've decided then, we add layers and layers of protection to stop that thing from ever happening again. You know, in the meantime, there's a war in Iraq, and there's all kinds of other things occurring. And then now in order to fly, we've got Homeland Security, and I have to take off my belt and my shoes. Mm-hmm. But when I looked at the odds of being killed by a foreign terrorist before 9/11 was about 50 million to 1. And it's still about 50 million to 1. So I started looking at this. So are we spending all of our energy trying to prevent that thing from happening again, rather than changing the timeline and looking what happened? What small thing could we change so it never happens at all? And when it doesn't happen at all, we won't know it. So let's stretch that a little further. So you're familiar with I've heard this. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I like that, because we really should measure it and do lessons learned from all these incidents and try to figure out how not to let that happen again. But if you and I are working together and you raise a concern to me and I say, well, that's interesting, I didn't think of that, and what do you think we should do to mitigate that? And we talk about it, and then that thing never happens because we had that conversation. How do you measure or manage that? And then so my focus is kind of on the other end. I don't think we need to change anything we're doing. We can't, because we don't know. We don't really have good data to know how many injuries we're stopping as a result of investigating and all that. But I think we can use the word "and" here, and we could spend a little more time in front, creating the environment that allows to raise concerns in a larger pool of predictions. And that's the word prediction that we talked about earlier. I don't think you're fond of the language of prediction, but this might be a good discussion.
Absolutely, and I think it's a great discussion. And I don't think the concept is new, Billy, because there is a lot of frustration in the risk and safety world that all the good work that is done is never acknowledged, because we are so focused on on things going bad and pear-shaped and whatnot. So, what you're saying? Is it any different from this discourse?
So I have a couple things to talk to that, Nipin. So we are really focused in industries on trying to prevent serious incidents from happening, and that's really good. And you're 100% right. We do really good work, and we don't get credit for things that don't happen. There's no parties for that, right? So all this no good deed goes unpunished because you don't ever get credit for the things that don't happen. You just get beat up for the things that happen. But on the same sense, how much do you think the environment plays a factor in making things safe? For example, culture, or I don't like the word culture, we use it too often, but when we create an environment at work that's toxic, for example, or that's command and control, as opposed to environment of team and coach and team, do you think one makes it safer than another? That's my question.
No, this is an interesting thing because there are no guarantees in life that once you have invested in making making a better culture, that you will not have accidents. But yes, there is a lot of science to suggest that the results are more or less positive, I would say, Billy. And I was actually intrigued by one thing you said, which is that let's not talk about culture, let's stick to the word environment. And I'd wonder why you would say that. Why should we not use the word culture? What's wrong with it?
Well, I don't think it's definable. I think every company seems to have a safety culture, but I don't know what that is. I mean, I understand trying to grow a culture of safety, but to define a safety culture, it might be different in your definition than mine.
And this is the other interesting things. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, no, you can interrupt me anytime. I just appreciate this discussion because I think this is a discussion we have to have more of. So if you look at the biology of us, there are things that enhance our potential and things that suppress it. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
So I have a pitch because I also speak in the human potential. I actually did a keynote that's recorded somewhere on moving from human performance to human potential. Because I think we underestimate the potential that we have. And in that little pitch, I hold up two seeds, and one's a corn seed and one's a sunflower seed. And I say there's a lot of potential in these seeds, and they look completely different. They're different sizes, different shapes, and different colors. And they're genetically coded to grow two completely different plants. But the formula to release their potential is exactly the same, because their biology is the same. And once you know the formula, you can either choose to plant them, or you can suppress it by doing nothing. You suppress their potential by doing nothing, or you can cast them to the wind, and then their potential is random depending where they land, right? So let's talk about us. So there's 8 billion of us, and this is what I've been researching the difference between social reality and physical reality. So, and I don't want to confuse your audience because it sounds like I'm going all over, but I'm really not. I'll bring it back. There's 8 billion of us, and when 8 billion of us are afraid or angry, we release the same biochemicals, right? Neurotransmitters, we're the same. And the same with trust. Trust is a different biochemical than anger. So if we create an environment that releases the right biochemicals, we operate at what's called socially enhanced cognition. That was from one of the texts. It might have been from Andy Clark's book, The Experience Machine. I can't remember. But so to me, the environment, I can either enhance your potential, Nipin, by releasing the right chemicals in you, or I can suppress it. And that's the environment I'm talking about. What environment are we creating in a team or a crew? So, for example, an orchestra, it's really easy to tell when somebody's out of sync in an orchestra, right? Or on a football team, right? If the person running the play doesn't really understand it, it doesn't go well. So when we release the right chemicals or biochemicals in us, it causes us to synchronize. And to me, that's kind of this is one of the missing links. If we create a team that's synchronized, we will start to recognize the disruption to that synchrony. But if we're not, we're all over the place and the band is everybody playing a note that they want, how do you tell where the disruption is? And so that's when I'm talking about environment. We actually have the power to create the environment to raise us to a higher level of cognition. And when we do that, we share stuff. You like to tell, we tell stories. You know, I know you're familiar with the power of storytelling. And what Atul Gawande wrote the book Checklist Manifesto. And what he did a study in Johns Hopkins Hospital where in the operating room before the operations, they would identify themselves, their role, and any concern they had. And they would face each other. And a little sidebar, Tan Lee in the book Neurogeneration has proven that when you make eye contact, your brain waves synchronize. So he would have them stand in a circle, identify themselves, their role, and any concern they had. And what he found in the experimental group, that group was 80% more likely to speak up during the operation. So what things don't happen in that operation as a result of that higher percentage of speaking up? We won't ever know. But I think it's worth pursuing.
It is. That's a really good point. And maybe there's another way of looking at it, Billy. Let's just talk about the assumptions that we are making so far. I think from what I understand from the discussion so far is that people would know what's going on in their organizations, but they just don't feel safe to express their concerns or ideas. Am I right? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, so not feeling safe to speak up is different than getting connected. Yes.
Yeah, so my problem with this whole narrative around speaking up and to an extent psychological safety is that somehow we are assuming that people are aware of the concerns. And and this is why I was saying that it is so important to take the discussion into culture and not environment, because what happens when you look at culture is that, now you talked about the idea of let's say, defining culture. My starting point is you cannot define culture like you cannot define love, like you cannot define trust.
Fair enough, yeah.
That you cannot define creativity, like you cannot define imagination. And the trouble is that these are things that are felt much before they can be realized, much before.
Absolutely.
So you know for sure that your wife loves you or you love your wife when the love is there. When it's gone, you know the moment it's gone. You can feel it, but you cannot put your fingers on it. You cannot prove it through a certificate that your wife loves you, a marriage certificate or whatever you want to call it. So we bring it back to culture now. A lot of culture, or almost all of culture, is lived in the unconscious space. Totally in the unconscious. So in order to understand culture, we have to feel the culture. We have to live the culture. And that applies as much as understanding human culture as it applies to other creatures. Even plants and animals have a culture. And so the early anthropologists, even now, a lot of anthropology, which is the study of culture, is actually devoted to what we call field work. Field work is where you go and live and eat and dance and even shit with people whose culture you want to understand and become part of their culture. So it's through participatory observations, through those conversations, that as an anthropologist you learn to distance yourself from the familiar and make the familiar strange, and so you can experience the culture. So it's very, very important to understand what is culture. Now the culture, all of culture is lived in the unconscious, which is what is it that a group of people share unconsciously between them. This could be metaphors, that could be language, this could be behaviors, this could be slogans, symbols, stories that they share about success and failure and so on. Now bringing it back to the idea that because all of life is lived in the unconscious, most of life is lived in the unconscious, how do we now situate this whole idea of articulating our concerns to people? When we have a concern in an organization or as a community or a society, how do we raise those concerns? The trouble is that most of the times we are not even aware of those concerns because they are in the unconscious. You can only articulate them when you start to to get in touch with your feelings and emotions. So we are emotional beings. We are very, and then actually when you read some of the literature or the science around feelings, almost all of culture came from our feelings. And feelings is something which is very, very unique to primates and to creatures who are more sophisticated, like human beings. So when we talk about feelings, feelings are a representation of emotions. And the difference between emotions and feelings is that your face might turn red when you see me because you don't like me, and that's your emotions, that's your bodily emotions. You cannot hide that from me. But how you articulate it, how you express it, will be very subjective. You can hide it from me. You can use certain words that would have a very subjective meaning for you, which would be so different from mine. And this is precisely the idea of feelings, that when we felt something went wrong, when we felt threatened, or we felt that there was an opportunity as we progressed through our human development, we started to become a cultural species. We started because there was rain and we could not explain it, and we felt threatened, or there was fire, or somebody who was very close to us died, and we felt threatened, and we felt something. The key word here is felt. And so we came up with all sort of rituals and symbols and myths and beliefs that started to shape our cultural being. And that is precisely the origin of all gestures, which is pre-verbal language and language. Now, when we come back to the idea of sharing our concerns, raising our concerns, it is so important that we situate that within the biological context, which is that we are unconscious being. We are mostly unconscious of ourselves. And people struggle to articulate themselves. In your words, people struggle to, even knowing that there is what the other person is saying could be a dangerous thing. It's just something we need to do something about. People struggle because nobody listens. And so those feelings remain within us. And sometimes those feelings are suppressed back into emotions. So the progression of emotions to feelings, to knowledge, and into memory happens only through social interactions, through conversations, when we feel that it's okay to express ourselves. And from there on, once we develop a sophisticated sense of what is it that the language and the memory and what lies ahead and our past experiences, we are better able to predict what lies ahead, in your words, or anticipate in my words. So that's something I wanted to just put it on the table.
So I love that. So I love that you brought up the unconscious, because I spent quite a bit of time with John Barge out of Yale and Gary Latham out of Canada. John Barge wrote the book Before You Know It, The Unconscious Reasons We Do What We Do. And Gary Latham wrote a bunch of books on conscious goal setting. And what happened was I was doing these mental rehearsals with crews to subconsciously prime them to be more aware of an incident. So for example, you and I are working together, we're on a 4-man crew, and I would say, let's just see if we're mentally prepared for this. Two people are in the bucket truck, because I work in the electric utility industry, 2 people on the ground. And Nippon, you hear an arc, you look over, I'm scream, and I'm unconscious in the bottom of my bucket. Go. And I just stand back. And then I run the simulation. It's just a mental simulation, and they have to figure out who's going to call 911, how are we going to get the guy down, where's the AED, and they run through this whole process. So what that does is create a circuit in your mind that thing is possible. So let's go back to your story about the unconscious. When we realize something's possible, our unconscious selves goes to work on it, right? You've read Daniel Kahneman, probably, Thinking Fast and Slow, and we can't not think of something. So if I say don't think of a white bear, that's one of his things. You laugh because you have to think of a white bear, right? So what I've noticed is when I get these workers, I say, look, at the end of the job brief, just stand in a circle, just re-identify your role, which is really good, because having run crews before, it's 3-way communication to really make sure the person understands what you told them. Because what happens, someone would go to work and say, hey, is that what I told you? Say, well, that's what I think you said, or I think I thought you said. But when you restate your role, that confirms to everybody's on the same page. Then when you say a concern, that concern becomes a possibility. If he doesn't raise the concern, and in that group, what I'm really fascinated, for example, I did it with a group of tree trimmers recently, and there was a 3-wire secondary. One of the wire had grown into a tree, and they had to cut it out. And they're like, well, I'm a little concerned because I've had the insulation wear off and that thing blow up in my face when I'm trying to cut it. The other guy says, yeah, you know what else? He said, it's only one phase. When we cut that, that's going to cross phase them because it's going to fall. So it's like when I say to you, in our country we have Kentucky Fried Chicken. And if I say finger licking, you'll see the word good and a chicken. But that isn't something you write down as a concern. That's something that rises up as a concern. So when we share concerns in a group, we create an interaction that creates an unconscious circuit for that thing, right? We can call it whatever word we want because the words we use are a social construct also, right? But 8 billion people experience life very similarly. Would you agree? I mean, we have different experiences, but the experience of life is pretty much, we're all born, we all die. It doesn't matter what color, religion, race, creed, it doesn't matter. If in my world, if I picked you up on my helicopter and you had a broken leg, it didn't matter what gender you were, none of that matters. It hurts the same. So this is kind of where I'm going with this, and it's we might get a little bit off on the edge here, Nipin, but I'm going to do this with you. Can you predict your future?
I actually, when you sent that message to me, you got me thinking. My answer to that is no, I cannot. My wife is going to pick my daughter from the school in the next half an hour, and I don't know whether she will come back home or not. All life is lived as if we will leave home and we will come back. So that's my answer to your question. It's in the as.
All right, and what you just but what you just described is the future, not your future. So the future we are not in control of because we are only. So my question is this: and I might have written to you this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Are we in the present moment right now? You're in England and I'm in the U.S. and it's 2 different times, right? But we're in the present moment, and I would believe that 8 billion people have different experiences by the moment, but the moment is the same. Would you agree? Right? And then
that's right.
Earlier, before we started, it was the past, and after we complete will be the future, right? But we aren't there. We are here in the present. So this is. I'm just trying to understand how 8 billion people experience the world, and if everybody's experiencing life in the moment, isn't every decision a prediction into the future? Because every decision is about the future. We don't move backwards, we move forwards. And when we spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, we crash because that's why the mirror, the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. So why that's important to me is if we don't think that we have control over our next decision, we're wrong because our brain does exactly everything we tell it. It's designed to do everything we tell it. And not only that, our subconscious is designed, or unconscious, or however, you know more about this than I do, but Andrei Viscontis wrote the book Brain Myths Exploded. And she said, behind the veil of our consciousness, our body processes 11 million bits of information a second. And our conscious only 40 or 50 a second. So when that thing comes to our consciousness without our permission, it comes from there, right? And that thing, so for example, you just went on quite a tour, I believe, didn't you?
I did.
Didn't you just go all over the place? Yeah.
Yes,
and did you plan way ahead for that?
My life is not so structured and planned. I just go with the flow. Yes.
That's awesome. So you decided to go and you went. Everything we decide happens. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to. So how do we raise that? So when we're staying in a circle and I say something that raises something in your thought out of your subconscious that comes to you without your permission, it changes an outcome. Yes. So if we create, we can call it culture, but if we create an environment where, psychological safety is maybe, I think this is my own opinion, it is one small piece of a huge puzzle, right? We can call it psychological safety. All I know is if we're operating as a team and synchronized, we operate at a higher cognitive level than we do if we're not synchronized. It happens with an orchestra, with a football team, with a Navy SEAL team.
I think.
So-
I think. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, well,
No, you
so
go.
so the question, I don't hear a lot of discussion about improving that connection to synchronize, and then starting to focus on recognizing disruptions. Like if you're my boss and you come in, you're mad and you're yelling, you just released the wrong chemicals in my team. And I actually had a team do a safety stop after I taught them. They said we called an all stop to allow us to resync because we were in a heated discussion about management, and we took a pause to resync so we could focus on the task at hand. So tell me, Nipin, what event didn't happen because they did that? We won't ever know.
No. Billy, I think you, as I'm listening to you, I'm coming to understand what is driving your thought process. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think, and you used the words synchronicity. You didn't say synchronicity. Synchronize. Yes, use the word synchronize a lot.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have to. You talked about Daniel Kahneman's kind of work, and I would like you to take you to another journey from this point. I'd like you to just forget Daniel Kahneman's work, which is still very brain-centric, and take you into another space, which is that the brain is not the mind. Your body,
Correct.
the entire body is a mind. And Kahneman's work, Kahneman being an economist and a hedonic psychologist, does not ever get to that level of understanding. So we are embodied beings. We have an embodied mind, like every other creature, like a bee that comes in a bumblebee, enters into your house and struggles to kind of get out of the space and tries to find a window or a space, and off it goes out. That sophisticated level of mind, you cannot replicate it even with the most powerful drones in the world, because the drone clearly separates the brain from the body, the computer microchip from the body of the drone. And a lot of discussion around human brain is centered around the idea of human brain as the metaphor of the brain is understood as a control tower for the body, which is fundamentally flawed, completely flawed. Every part of your body has its own mind. And your brain is not a control tower. Your brain is basically a warehouse that coordinates between those different minds. But your whole body is very intelligent, extremely intelligent. And what you talk about, the idea of synchronism, is basically that, there are, for the sake of simplifying things, we operate from three levels of being, or three levels of mind, or three levels of thinking: the brain, the heart, and the gut, right? So it's the conscious and the unconscious mind, the conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious, which sits in the gut, which is your culture. When they work together, you are the most sophisticated person on this planet. You can predict, you can anticipate everything that lies ahead. The trouble is, in the Western world, we deny the idea of the embodied mind. We deny the idea of the personal, the collective unconscious, and we treat human body, the anatomy of the body, as brain-centric, rational beings. So, and the moment you start to experience the embodied mind, now whether you take a theological perspective to it, or you take a biological perspective to it, or neurosciences, it still comes to the same thing, that the more you live as an embodied person, as a full person, the more you become better at understanding what lies ahead. Whether you call it prediction or anticipation, let's not get into that discussion. But I think the key to risk intelligence, the key to understanding yourself and the other person, is living as a full person. I think that's the key to it. And I talk about it a lot in my book.
So I'm going to love your book. So I don't know if you've read it, Annie M. Paul, The Extended Mind. Really good book. She refers to Andy Clark's work. Have you read Andy Clark from Sussex?
I have.
The Experience
yes,
Machine.
absolutely.
So Andy did a paper in 1997. Where does the mind stop and the world begin? And I think they talked a little bit about kids in elementary school, and having them sit on their hands while they do math, and they couldn't do math because when they start moving their arms and hands around, their mind goes into their hands. And then the standing joke is they learned for sure that your mind goes wherever your attention is in 2007 because that was the invention of the iPhone. And now we know if your iPhone reduces cognitive load because you store some of your mind in your iPhone. And we know that when you lose your iPhone, you lose your mind because you can't find your iPhone.
And it's interesting you say
so
your iPhone and not the iPhone.
Yeah. So like our biological. I really like what you're talking about. So this whole thing. I asked a physicist recently. We had the eclipse here in the U.S. And I ended up, a friend of mine invited two friends, and one was an astrophysicist, the other was a physicist that taught at a university. And what I asked him was this question, and maybe you've heard this before, but I said, I've been waiting to talk to a physicist because now that we know about quantum physics and this quantum entanglement, how everything's vibrational, everything's at a frequency, I said, does that prove the 100th monkey theory to be true? Are you familiar with the 100th monkey?
No, I'm not, but I'll love to hear from you. I have something to say, but yeah, please, I'd love to hear that story first.
So in 1950s, they were doing a study of, I'll paraphrase this and make it quick. They did a study of macaque monkeys on an island, and they really loved sweet potatoes, and they would dig them out of the sand and eat the sweet potatoes, and then you could see them spitting the sand out of their mouth. One of the macaque monkeys learned that he could put it in the stream, wash it, and then the rest of the community learned to wash their sweet potatoes. Somewhere on another island where they were studying these other monkeys, they started simultaneously washing their fruit before they ate it. And the question is, how did that information travel? And since then, the researchers back this was in the 50s, believed that a monkey swam and taught them. But quantum entanglement might disagree with that. That when we reach a critical mass, that information travels. Much like, are you familiar with quorum sensing bacteria? Have you ever heard of that?
No, but I have another explanation for it. But please keep going. Yes.
So quorum sensing bacteria. There's certain bacteria that get in your gut that are dangerous, but they don't release their toxin until they reach critical mass, and then they all release their toxin. They sense a quorum, a certain population. Then they all release their toxin at the same moment. And I don't know if they call each other up on the cell phone or text each other. I'm not sure how they do that. But that's kind of a model for this whole idea of the 100th monkey.
Yes.
And are we on a vibrational, if we're on the same vibrational plane, how did fire travel around the world when somebody learned? Did we send a committee of people to teach people fire? Or did it just happen? I don't know the answer.
And this is a fascinating thing because we come from different perspectives, but we reach the same conclusion. So, not we, but somebody else has worked it out for us. We're just exchanging ideas here. But if you read the work of Carl Jung, for example, he talks about the idea of collective unconscious, which we have already kind of discussed slightly. And the idea is that how is it possible that so many different cultures across geographies and across times have come up with the same symbols, exactly the same symbols? Let me show you one. This is the Indian goddess Kali, right? And you can see the goddess standing right on this statue, on this devil, right?
Yeah.
This is Saint Michael. This is Saint Michael, and exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And my point is this. My point is this. And the central message remains the same, that the devil is not outside. The devil is within us. And the devil is what we call ego. And unless you're willing to crush this ego, there is no way you can learn. And how can it be possible that these two cultures that have never met in time and space, never, share the common symbols? And Jung would call it collective unconscious. Same thing goes for mandalas and many other cultural symbols. And across time, across geographies, how do you explain these things? And the origin of all this, both in neuroscience as well as in depth psychology, is the same, which is the unconscious, which is the dreams, which is the source of all imagination. All imagination comes from dreams. And it's so fascinating. Today we teach leadership courses, which is basically how to become better managers, and there is no real mention of dreams and imagination. And so we talk about visionary leaders, but we never talk about the unconscious, the dreams, and what motivates people. It's fascinating. But these are so important things, such important things to discuss when it comes to understanding the source of all human decision making. And by default, the discussion for this topic, how do you know what lies ahead if you don't know where you came from?
That's true. I guess what I'm looking at, I think we're talking about the same things, and maybe I'm confusing environment and culture as being similar, and they're not. But what I'm witnessing is if I can get people to interact in a way. So I'll give you an example. I just taught a workshop, and I had everybody go around in a circle. There was only just a small workshop, 16 people, and I had them all identify, tell us your name and what you do, and they did. And I said, can we do that one more time? They said, sure. I said, this time I'd like you to tell me your first name and something you are. And then it completely changed the dynamic in the room, because now they were looking up to the left and the right, trying to think, what do you mean something I am? And I said, well, you guys are a lot of things. I just want to know what rises to the top. And this person who said that what his job was now says, well, I'm a father of 8. Next person says, well, I'm a guitarist. And it goes around the room, and they all start, well, I'm a mom. And it goes around the room, and now everybody knows everybody to a deeper level. And to me, the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung would talk about, we now know each other at a deeper unconscious level. And when I'm working with you, you're not just another worker. You're a dad of eight children, or you're working with your fingers, and you're a guitarist. You know what I mean? And the associative availability to identify risk may have something to do with our ability to collectively, in my opinion, collectively connect with each other at a deeper level. And that's kind of, I'm not trying to make it, I don't believe at all that we are our conscious selves. I mean, I tell people that you are not your emotion. Your emotion's a biological response. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one that's aware of the voice in your head. You're the observer, as I believe Buddhists would say. So in Viktor Frankl's words, that space between stimulus and response, if I can create that space, I have time to respond as me, not as my biology. Right? If I make you angry and I respond, that's not me. And it kind of lets people off the hook that wasn't you, that was your biology. And now you're feeling a little guilty, and you're saying in your head, gee, I shouldn't have said that. But and they say, well, what do you mean I'm not the voice in my head? And I say, well, next time you're driving down the road in deep conscious thought and you find yourself 2 miles past your exit, the one who is driving, the one who is aware you're driving is who that is. So if we can learn, Mel Robbins says the 5-second rule. She's got some TED Talks. I really like that too. Unhack your biology and be you, not your biology.
Yeah.
And that talks to ego.
Yes, and there's another way of looking at it, Billy, and this could be a really nice way to close this wonderful discussion with you. See, the thing is that there is nature out there, and within the nature, there are predators and there are preys, right? The nature doesn't give a hoot to how we think about nature. The nature works with its own rules, with its own principles, with its own randomness, with its own chaos, right? And then came the human beings, much, much later in the history of evolution, and wanted to give some sort of meaning to this, to this randomness. So the Greeks gave one meaning, which is, create order out of chaos. The Christians gave another meaning, which is follow the word of the God. And the Indians gave another meaning, which is, self-realization. And it's all about realizing your full potential through your life, which is from Atman to ego, right? And it's a cyclical way of living. Now, who knows what happens after death? Who knows? Nobody knows that. But we all have our own myths. We all have our own myths to give some sort of meaning to the meaningless, some sort of form to the formless. And this is precisely what you call culture. That what is it that you believe in at the very deepest level? But as you go a little deeper into it, you realize that all stories of culture are centered around the idea of fallibility and mortality. That because we know that we are mortal beings, so what's unique about consciousness is that one, you know you're going to die one day. Two, it is very, very disturbing to live with that thought. And so we create the idea of culture. Every culture gives some sort of meaning to this randomness. And I think the sooner we come to realize that at the end of it, it's your myth and it's my myth, and live comfortably with that idea that no matter what, it's not. So the trouble today is that my myth is better than yours. The Christian myth is better than the Hindu myth, and the vice versa. The moment we start to realize that a lot of life is lived in the unconscious, and a lot of us are just struggling to give some sort of meaning through narratives, through language, through experiences to this meaningless random world, I think we will start to respect each other a lot more. I think we are so busy fighting with each other that mine is better than yours, and we learn nothing from our differences. In fact, when we go a little bit deeper, there are not many differences actually. It's just myths that give meaning to our lives.
I love that, and I really appreciate this opportunity, Nipin. So what you're talking about is where I am. I'm when we were born. We live a life and we die, and we die never. We fall asleep never to wake up. But we're born, we wake up having never been asleep. I'm not aware of anything before waking up. I'm not going to I'm not aware of what I will know after I die. So I'd like to tell people I'm either all religions or none. I'm not really sure. I spend a lot of time now focusing on the only thing I have control over is my decision now, and that decision is going to change my future timeline. So I was speaking with a very religious person on a plane coming home from Orlando, and he was said, "What religion are you?" I said, "I'm not really sure." I said, I'm either all or none. I've been several. And I said, "But," he says, "Well, how can that be?" And I said, "Well, let's look." I said, "Are you aware of do you know the pilot?" He said, "Well, no." I said, "Do you know his name?" He said, "No." I said, "Do you know have you seen his credentials?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, that's kind of how I live my life." I said, "I don't know him either, and I'm okay with it. So I don't care who's flying the airplane, and evidently neither do you." What's that?
Soren Kierkegaard.
What are you showing me?
Yes. Kierkegaard,
yeah.
this Danish philosopher. Yes.
And I said, and I'm okay with whoever's running the universe. I have no control over that. And honestly, in our country, politics doesn't bother me either because I get to vote every 4 years. That's 10 votes in 40 years. I have absolutely no control over what's going on in that circus. All I can do is vote. So I don't allow my energy to go in places that I have no control. And if I can help other people learn this in a work relationship, I'm thinking we could know each other at a deeper level. It doesn't matter. I often say this, and maybe I can end with this. A Muslim, a Jew, a Buddhist, and a Catholic can build a house together with the same pile of tools. Because the pile of tools in the house live in physical reality, and they don't really care what we think. We are allowed to, like you mentioned, to have any belief we want, but the objective is what we want to work for it. We don't have to impress my belief on anyone else. We just have to meet the objective. And I think you said it better than I did. But
and it's so important, Billy, that as we enter into this house or we start to build this house with all the tools at our disposal, we never become arrogant that my way of looking at these tools and assembling them is any better than anyone else. Just because I have access to science or scientific information. Because science has its own myths, just like every other religion.
Absolutely. So I think we've gone full circle here. I think the answer is us.
Yes.
That's what I'm a little worried about the next shiny idea that comes up, and we all move to it. We focus all our attention on it. And in my country, the serious injuries and fatalities in my industry, in the electrical industry, haven't changed in 12 years.
No.
So it's been the same for 12 years.
And Billy,
so we need to.
Just,
I think. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go first.
I mean, This kind of represents that whole idea. And if you in the UK with maybe different ideas than I have in the US can have just a nice discussion. We don't have to agree, but and I tell people, as soon as we move to defense, we justify and rationalize, and that's about something in the past. The past we can't change. But if I'm curious, I don't know you very well, but I'm curious and interested why you might think something I don't. It doesn't detract from anything I believe to listen to you, and that's what I'm trying to sell, I think. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. So the discussion started off with the idea that can we predict the future, and can we predict what happens next? I don't know about prediction, but I sincerely believe in what you touched upon, which is that if we start to realize ourselves better, if we start to come in touch with our unconscious, I think the unconscious knows it all. It knows it all. We just live such a brain-centric life that even when the unconscious warns us, we just disregard everything because we're so seduced by science and data and everything else in the outside world that we deny the inner world. And I think there is a lot of potential, and you use the word potential. There's an immense potential in the inner world. It's just a matter of getting in touch with it. Yes. And I think the Eastern world has done a great job in this space. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I watched a debate between an academic Buddhist and a physicist, and it was really well done. And the physicist had written a book, and the academic Buddhist was saying, "So you know a lot about the universe, and you're looking for intelligent life out there." And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I think you missed it." And they said, "Where? Why?" He says, "It's in the 5,000 years of meditation in Asia." And none of it is in your textbook. Yeah. So I really appreciate this.
Yeah.
I think it's so. I think if we.
Sorry, please go on.
No, go ahead. You're increasingly becoming what?
I said I'm increasingly becoming convinced that both Buddhism and Hinduism hold something very profound as to how we should live our lives. And I think the commonality between Hinduism and Buddhism and a stark contrast with the archetype of the West is that everything in Buddhism, Hinduism is about peace and harmony with the nature, living with the nature. Whereas the way we live life in the West is everything is against the nature. And I think that's something fundamentally wrong here in the way capitalism, which is the archetype of the West world, survives. Degradation of human skills and degradation of environment. And both go against the principles of nature.
Absolutely. I this morning I row every morning. I live on a lake, and I do about a 10K on one of those long, skinny rowing sculls. And when I was a coach I had once told me this. She said, "You'll never be as efficient as the boat. The boat is designed with the most efficiency, and any movement you make against the direction of travel will slow down the boat." And I think that was a metaphor for life. We can go kicking and screaming and fighting and pushing, or we can move with it. And I think when we learn to move with it, we move smoother, faster, and at higher levels. And I think that I think is the environment I'm looking for to make work safer. Is instead of fighting each other, let's move with each other.
And more respect for nature, because we can never be more arrogant. We can never be so full of ourselves. We have to respect the nature because. And then in the words of Kierkegaard, I was just showing in the book, you have to submit yourself to the unknown, which is the nature. I think it's a very important thing, and we consistently miss this out. We become so arrogant because we have access to data and science and objective knowledge. None of this works against the mysteries of the nature. I think becoming respectful about the mysteries and the mystical is very important to live a fulfilling life. Certain things can never be understood at the rational level. Never.
Yeah, I believe what you're describing is the world I want my grandchildren to live in. You're creating a world that, and I don't think any parent would argue with that. A world where we collectively work together to a better good instead of, and I'm not political either, but it really disturbs me at this time of our existence that we think the wisest solution is a bomb. I just don't understand that. I don't know. I just don't understand how that it could be any part of any intellectual solution is to blow something up. But I have no control over that either, Dippin. So I try to let it go.
But Billy, yeah, we've been talking about it consistently throughout, and I think the problem is that hatred is built on the idea that it is so easy to create differences. It is so difficult to understand the source of those differences, and I think that's where love begins. It is so important to understand the source of differences, because when you start to delve deeper into cultural differences, there aren't many. There are not many. When you start to understand that all that we are doing is giving meaning to the meaningless, it doesn't matter whether it's a Christian meaning or a Hindu meaning or a Buddhist meaning or a Greek or a Roman meaning. At the end of the day, it's a myth. And science is so busy debunking myths when it should be surfacing those myths and trying to understand the commonalities. And we're not good at it.
Yeah. No, but all we can do is try, right? That's what this is. I really appreciate you coming across the water to talk to me. This has been awesome.
Likewise, I will stop.